were one of the 16 scientists who met this July at Altenberg at Konrad Lorenz Institute to talk about reformulating the theory of evolution based on natural selection. Is the extended evolutionary synthesis now a reality following the Altenberg meeting?
Yes, I would say it's a reality, not just following the Altenberg meeting, but people who were there and others who weren't there have been working on extending the breadth of the evolutionary synthesis for some time from a number of perspectives. And I think that this meeting is just a confirmation that it's underway and perhaps an impetus to push it forward even more.
The extended synthesis has been described as a graft onto the modern synthesis, the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution. While your final report is to be published next year by MIT, is it the plan in the interim to cast a net globally for scientific perspectives on the extended synthesis? Because as it stands now, the extended synthesis is largely an American, European concept.
Yes, I know people in India and Japan who are working very much along these lines and extending the synthesis. So I think that we're all in touch with our international colleagues, and I don't think that it really is confined to just the U.S. and Europe.
Is the modern synthesis, the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution, now history? So that public money being spent on research based on the modern synthesis may in fact be wasted?
I wouldn't put it that way. I think that up until fairly recently, what's called the modern synthesis has been the only game in town. And I don't think that anybody at our meeting or any people working in evolutionary theory, maybe there would be some that would say that the phenomena and mechanisms described in the modern synthesis don't pertain anymore. They do pertain. The question is, are they the major forces of evolution? Are they somewhat subordinate? And you have a wide spectrum of opinion, even within our group of 16, as to whether the mechanisms of the modern synthesis are the predominant mechanisms or they're the subordinate mechanisms.
How much agreement is there among your Altenberg colleagues about the gene arriving late in the evolutionary process and playing a secondary role?
So I think possibly some things that I've said or have been quoted as saying, or interpretations of things that I've said, or possibly some other people have put it in that light that the gene is a late arrival. But we've never in our scientific papers have said anything like that. We're all dealing with organisms that have genes. Even before there were multicellular organisms, there were single-celled organisms with more than 1 billion years of evolution behind them, in which genetic mechanisms were refined and established. And so there's prebiotic evolution that led to single cells that had genes. But once we reached the multicellular world, which is maybe 500 million years ago or more, but not a very long time relative to the entire history of cellular life, once we hit that stage, we were very much dealing with organisms with genes. The question is, have all of the complex forms that have emerged since that point, since multicellularity, are they dependent solely on genetic mechanisms, or is it genetic mechanisms plus other determinants of morphogenesis, the generation of form? So I don't know of anybody that thinks that genes arrive late, but perhaps genetic consolidation of patterns and forms trail after the origination of the patterns and forms.
With the extended synthesis, has a shift actually begun from the gene-centered perspective of evolution to non-centrality of the gene?
So the question is, dealing with
I mean, as a result of this meeting,
Yes.
has the shift happened?
Well, there is, in some people's minds, the shift happened a while ago in their own work. The general shift has not happened, and it may not happen for quite some time if it happens at all. But let me just put it in a more precise way. So it's not a shift from mechanisms that use genes to mechanisms that don't use genes. All the mechanisms use genes, but the question is, are the differences between different forms solely due to genetic evolution, or are they due to other organizing processes of multicellular life beyond the gene, plus the gene?
What do you think the origin of the gene is?
Well, the origin of the gene is it's one area that's very poorly understood in evolutionary biology, and here we're talking about what's called prebiotic evolution that preceded cells as we know it, because all cells that we know use genes as their hereditary mechanism. There was a period in early cellular life, and this has been written about by a scientist named Carl Woese, where he believes that genes were exchanged very freely between organisms. So he calls this a pre-Darwinian world, where that basically organisms take on new genetic characteristics, not through what's called vertical transmission, but by horizontal transmission from sharing with other organisms. But if you go back even before then, where did the gene come from? Some people suggest that there was a world of RNA that preceded the world of DNA, and that RNA was the most primitive genetic mechanism. So you might have RNA genes preceding DNA genes, but where did the RNA genes come from? Then you get into the area that's called chemical evolution. There are processes in non-living systems that could potentially generate the molecules of living systems. And there are theories of thermal vents under the ocean where there's a very extensive chemical shuffling and reactions and things that could potentially generate these building blocks of life. But I've been to meetings where this is discussed, and I've had some very smart people are at work in this area, but there's still big gaps in our understanding.
The term punctuated evolution is part of the new extended synthesis language. How does it differ from the Eldredge-Gould concept of punctuated equilibrium, which argues that evolution has not been a gradual process as reflected in the fossil record?
Yeah, so this is it's a somewhat controversial area because it involves, first of all, estimations of time scales. When Gould and Eldredge first presented their idea of punctuated equilibrium, they were just pointing to the fossil record and saying that things that were considered gaps in the fossil record because there were discontinuities in the forms that were uncovered might not truly be gaps. Things may have happened relatively fast, and therefore one form supplanted another form by evolutionary processes that were not entirely gradual. Okay. Now, then there was a kind of, over the years, I would say, kind of a backing off from considering what evolutionary biologists would call saltational mechanisms, which are true jumps, so that you have one form being replaced by another form very rapidly. Gould and Eldredge would both talk about rapid in a geological sense. So they were talking about millions of